Welcome to Fun and Fundraising, everybody, the podcast where we talk with people behind top nonprofit galas and signature fundraising events to showcase how they positively transform their communities. I'm your host, Rob Giardinelli, and today I'm really excited to have Nancy Pollard on as a guest. And Nancy is the co-founder and executive director of an organization called Friends of the Children. And they have a wonderful fundraising event each year in the spring called Dinner with Friends. And I'm really excited to talk with Nancy for a couple of reasons. One, she is a founder, and we don't get to have those very often. So it'll be a real treat to see, how this organization's evolved and how she, what inspired her to find it. But also, we've never done her type of genre of fundraising, and that is it is mentorship for children, and the amount of time that the mentors spend with these students really is inspiring. So you will learn an awful lot from her today. So with that, Nancy, welcome. I'm just so thrilled to have you here as a guest.
Thank you, Rob. It's a privilege. I appreciate you inviting me.
Absolutely. So share with us what the mission of Friends of the Children is.
So, Friends of the Children is a 30 plus year old national organization that is dedicated to breaking the cycle of generational poverty. And we do that in a really unique way, which is to proactively identify the most vulnerable kids when they are kindergarten age, so 4 to 6, enroll them for 12 years and commit to get them through high school graduation, obviously with a plan for what's next, without becoming part of the juvenile justice system and without becoming a teen parent. And we know that the key factor in their being capable of achieving those outcomes, in particular coming from families and environments where that has not necessarily been the norm, is the presence of a consistent, stable adult. And so we give them that in the form of a professional mentor. So the friend in Friends of the Children is someone for whom it is a full-time job to work with a cohort of 8 kids for 4 hours each a week, every week, all year round. Importantly, that is half in the classroom and half outside, half out in the community. And then it's also very intentionally designed time. So I don't know about you, but earlier in my career, I had an opportunity to serve as a mentor. And I basically just hung out with this young person and hoped that, my infinite wisdom rubbed off by osmosis. I had no idea almost ever if it was time well spent. And so I particularly appreciate that this model is designed to be very thoughtful and intentional and to instill in each child, based on a university validated logic model, the exact skills, life skills, social emotional skills, academic support skills that they will need to achieve those outcomes in the long term.
That was so cool. And I actually have a couple of follow-up questions with that. So, like when you were saying half in the classroom and half outside the classroom, how does, I guess, the education system or the school system factor into the day-to-day work that those mentors are doing?
So it's a very important piece, both in helping us find kids who are already falling through the cracks, even as young as kindergarten, which is not something that I realized was common before I joined this space. And then it's really important that we have the friends be able to access kids in the classroom and spend time alongside them in real time, because we are typically working with kids who are not just academically behind, but also fairly behaviorally challenging. And so it's a real win from the teacher's perspective, because it's basically, a dedicated trauma-informed adult who is instilling social emotional skills in real time. But then obviously, of course, it's a huge benefit to the child because they are practicing in real time skills that they need to be more successful in the classroom for the next 12 plus years.
That's it's just so fascinating to see how you all start this one at such a young age. And two, but you mentioned, that this organization's been around for a while. And I know the Austin chapter you said, was 8 years old and you're a co-founder. What inspired you, to kind of go from that, where you have done mentoring before and it was maybe less structured, to do something that's really structured and really kind of make it your life's work and your life's passion to do?
So I feel like I came to this through an interesting combo of experiences that teed me up well for this role. And that is because I used to be a trust and estates attorney. And so a significant part of my job was working with very wealthy people on their charitable giving plans. And I, achieved a certain comfort level in those communications that I think has been really valuable as we talk about the fundraising piece. But when my kids were little, so I have three boys who actually were born 3 years in a row, I stopped working at a law firm and stayed home with them when they were in preschool. And I became, among, other volunteer opportunities, I became a CASA advocate, so court appointed special advocate. And it was really that experience that directly led me to Friends of the Children. And that is because I was truly blown away in a positive way at how much you could get accomplished with, in the midst of very broken systems, with traumatized people, super complicated family dynamics. I just sort of thought, like, this will be helpful, sure, but how much could you get done? And it turns out, just by being very consistent and moderately resourceful, you could get a lot done. And just as importantly, maybe you could avert so many negative outcomes by being the consistent, stable presence in these very broken systems and complicated circumstances. At the same time, and I say this as still a huge fan of, partner of, supporter of CASA, I found it frustrating that the model is designed to be entirely reactive. There is not a great prevention aspect to it. And I also felt at the same time that it's hard for there to be an effective preventative aspect in that space if it is difficult for you to partner with the parents, the biological parents. And there are so many dynamics there that do make that challenging, if not impossible. And so I was really sort of on my soapbox in my community and my network, wanting people to support CASA, but also in doing the volunteer job on a, daily or weekly basis, kind of expressing these frustrations to some of my friends. One of my good friends is in private equity, and she actually learned about Friends of the Children because she was serving as the interim CEO of the software company that at that point Friends used to collect all their data. So she came to me and said, I think this is all the things that you've been talking about, both in terms of the positives and the sort of pain points that you would love to solve for. And so she and I dug in and learned a lot more about the organization. And then originally, she and I just volunteered to raise the money to get a chapter started in Austin. She has a huge job. Being a full-time stay-at-home mom is also a full-time job in a different way. And so we were doing that as volunteers, neither of us with any plans for it to be more than that. And we ended up raising the money. The national board requires that $1.5 to $2 million be pre-raised before they'll consider an application for a new chapter, among other things, obviously. But they want to see that there's community buy-in and some sustainable support. This is not an expensive model. We're committing for 12 years. So she and I found 1.7 million from 50 local Austin families in about 3 months in 2017. And then we had, additionally, because we were able to do that on such a short timeline, an opportunity to apply for some federal dollars as a subaward through the national organization of Friends of the Children. And really, it was at the end of both of those processes combined that we looked at each other and we were sort of like, we cannot let any stranger come in and run this. We've made promises to everyone we know. We've asked them for their money. We've gone through this, much more complicated application process than we had any idea what we were getting into, which is, how all great stories start. And so I ended up going back to work a few years earlier than planned to run it. And she was the founding board chair. And I ran the Austin chapter for 8 years before shifting over to run Texas.
Wow. It's so cool to see how that started because it's interesting how you almost raise the money almost like a startup business does.
Yeah.
To get that, where you got your, for lack, I mean, we can use that word kind of metaphorically here, angel investors, because that's essentially what these families were to allow you to do this mentorship. It's so fascinating to kind of hear how that started. And I guess my question is, what advice would you give to someone looking to start a chapter in their community from a national organization? Like, what's the one thing that they really would need to do to, get started to see if it's viable for them?
I think it's really a huge benefit if you want to start a new chapter of an organization that you're able to rely on the data and the outcomes of the longer standing chapters. And that's something that we particularly took advantage of in Austin. As I said, my co-founder was in private equity. So we are pitching a lot of people who value data and outcomes and ROI. And we referred to this project as, raising our seed funding, and really played into also, I think, Austin has a very entrepreneurial spirit generally. This is not the kind of old money established place that Houston or Dallas is. People are willing to take a chance on something new. It worked out well that it was just new here, right? It had been proven in many other locations. And so we were really able to marry those two things together.
That's so cool to hear that. And thank you for kind of sharing, the guidance in doing that and how it worked for you and how, you've able to kind of been able to expand it. And now your role is also expanded with the organization. But I do want to go back to the mentors. And, I'm especially fascinated because to get someone to commit for 12 years is a long, long time. So share with us the vetting process in finding these mentors to make sure that they're going to be willing to commit for that period of time.
Okay, so important distinction, and I'm glad you're bringing this up. The ideal situation, best case scenario, is each child has one friend for kindergarten through fifth grade and a second friend for sixth through 12th grade. So we are not trying to hire people for 12 years. Will some kids have three or four friends across the 12 years as opposed to two? Yes, of course, like life happens. But we are very intentional and diligent in hiring people for whom this is part of a career path. So this is not, I just graduated from college and I don't know what I want to do. I will be a mentor, right? We are not even going to interview someone unless they already have 3 years of experience working with vulnerable kids and they want to make a 3 year minimum commitment to this role because they understand the immense value of that consistency. And then we have a 4 round interview process. And so we really are able to attract people who are coming from, public school teaching, the child welfare system, ancillary nonprofits, who they want as their life's purpose to serve vulnerable kids and families, but they have fairly consistently felt, I think, under resourced, overwhelmed. They don't get to see lots of impact. And they come to us and we say, we're going to pay you a living wage. We're going to give you benefits and all kinds of support systems. We're going to give you a reasonable workload of 8 kids and their families. But we are also going to expect to see demonstrable impact on a regular and ongoing basis in order for you to stay in this role. It actually attracts a very special, talented type of person.
Share like what that type of person is. Like, is there a common trait that a lot of the ones that you found successful maybe stay beyond the 3 years and maybe stay 4, 5, 6 years? Is there some trait that they have that you just kind of notice? It's like, what, there's a through line with some of these mentors.
I'm sure that you could source that question with a handful of people on any of our leadership teams and get different answers. I would say that from my perspective, we work really hard to hire people with shared lived experiences to the families that we are working with. I would say that is the through line because it is a hard job, right? It is an incredibly challenging job. And it's one where you're always trying to be mindful of boundaries and secondary trauma and, not burning people out. But I think it is that personal experience of having escaped some generational patterns and being able to maybe attribute that to a coach or an aunt or one specific person that really keeps people in a very difficult role because they understand from a personal level what it is we're working towards here.
Absolutely. And it almost sounds like there might even be a little bit of those people understand that someone may not have been there for them as, as children, and they
Exactly.
want to pay that
Exactly.
forward,
Exactly.
to the next generation. That's just beyond admirable, and especially to commit not months, but years and substantial years and really kind of make it your life is really, I mean, it's really, really admirable. And, I want to go back to talk a little bit about, when you were founding it with you and your co-founder being, the first board chair and really, nonprofits, I always kind of view them as a three-legged stool, especially with events. You've got the event committee on one side, you've got the organization on the second stool, and the third stool is the board. So, talk about what advice you would give to someone looking to start a board, looking to start a new nonprofit and really getting a strong board that's going to really make the impact that you want to set out to do.
Mhm, mhm. So I think that there's a couple different pieces to that. The first is that I always think of board building as coming out of three buckets. And one of them is, of course, your sort of leaders in key industries, right? Your law firm partners, CPAs, private equity people, et cetera. They have not just big brains, but also skill sets that are relevant to building a successful business. Secondly, we want to have people who really understand the community that we are working to serve. That does not necessarily, to me, mean people that come from the community that we are trying to serve. It means people who understand them. So I would say my favorite example of that in Austin is our head child welfare judge has been on our board since we started the Austin chapter. She has an incredible perspective on what we are doing and is able to speak to strategic questions in a way that nobody else in the room can. Third, obviously, you need board members who are going to write significant checks and recruit their networks. Now, is there going to be overlap in all three of those buckets? Of course. Is every board member expected to give financially? Of course. But that's sort of how I think about building a board. And then I think, too, the other piece is to have clarity on what kind of board culture you want to build, right? And so for us, I would say that was both that we were looking for people who and this is an overgeneralization, but we're sort of, C-suite level in the world that they operated in. This was not, to our thinking, the appropriate space to like train young people who are excited about philanthropy, right? Like we really wanted people who knew what they were doing on this board because there's a lot of money to raise. There was a lot at stake in terms of building a culture, staffing an organization, all of those things. And then I think if you are going to try to attract those people, one, you have to be clear with them that that's who is going to be in the room, right? And you also have to be very clear about what kind of board culture you are trying to create and how you desire to use their time and what they can look for from you in return for them giving their very valuable time.
I'm glad you mentioned that last part specifically about it's a two-way street. And, I think a lot of times people think of philanthropy as and it's not the correct point of view, but some people think of it as a philanthropist gives to an organization, the organization takes the money and they do the programs. But it is a two-way street and it's an ongoing relationship, especially in a board where they're going to be involved for a long, consistent period. They're going to have to go to board meetings every month or every quarter or whatever it is that the bylaws are of the organization. You know,
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that. And obviously one of the ways you continue to raise money, you've been highly successful in doing so, is your annual signature fundraising gala dinner with friends. So, talk a little bit about, when and I believe last year's event, I believe Lydia told me it raised about $1.4 million, if I'm not mistaken, or in that realm, and that's an incredible amount of money. But tell us, a little bit about the programs that Dinner with Friends proceeds help fund and or support.
So the proceeds of Dinner with Friends literally go towards hiring mentors and serving kids. And one of the things that I love about our Austin board, and there are many things about the Austin board that are extraordinary, is that they in our very first year in our strategic plan committed to board giving at a level that would cover all administrative costs. And that's a really extraordinary thing to be able to say and to own, but it also means that we can then funnel so much more of every dollar straight towards program implementation and the cost of actually operating our mission.
That's that's fantastic on every level. And let's dive a little bit deeper then, with you get the donors in the room, especially if they're, obviously they're committing to donate funds. And can I ask, is the board like with the monetary donations every year, is it the gala plus, or is the gala part kind of their overall financial commitment that you have them do?
So historically, what we've done is asked everybody to just, commit to write a check at a certain level each year. And then, any event that we do is additive to that. Is that a hard and fast rule? No. Are there some people that are saying, well, I know I'm going to spend X at the event and I'm going to give X in a check form now? Yes, there's of course flexibility. But I think the thinking is, at least my thinking is, that it is so important for the board of any organization to be financially committed to the operations of the organization in a substantial way and in a way that is entirely altruistic and philanthropic, right? And we try hard to make our event something that people actually want to attend and it is fun. And so that's the benefit to you of your gift there. We want there to just be a straight gift without necessarily a benefit to you as part of your board service role.
That's really cool. And kind of, going a little bit further into the event with the board, talk about how you leverage and utilize them to help drive sponsors as well as attendance, because, there's really two sides to a successful gala, and it's getting the people in the room who may not give the first year, but they like what you're doing, but it's also bringing in the corporate sponsors so that, the money's raised.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is fun about founding an organization is that you get to really sort of create what is your culture of philanthropy? What are the values of your development approach? What is it that you want to be known for in your events? And I told you, I so appreciate the name of this podcast because I started saying when I took on this role, I am determined to put the fun back in fundraising. And I don't mean this as a knock on any organization, but there are just so many enormous fundraising events that you can barely get people to show up to. It is not an enjoyable time. The food is not good. The drinks make you ill the next day. The program goes on too long. You're begging people to fill the seats at your table that you felt obligated to buy, right? Like we've all done a million of these. And so what I said, from the get-go is I'm excited to serve in this role, but I am not going to build a fundraising machine that depends on that approach. And if you guys, the board, want someone who's going to do that, great. You're just not going to get that in me. You're going to need to find somebody else. And so we were very thoughtful in how we created all of our fundraising events, but in particular, this one as our signature. And that, we think about we are paying professionals to serve the most vulnerable kids for 12 years, right? We are committed to an approach that is about quality and not quantity. And we have tried to replicate that in Dinner with Friends. And so we have kept the event intentionally small so that there will never, ever be an approach by anyone of just filling seats to have a warm body there. We are dedicated to having it be a space people are happy to be in, food that you enjoy eating, drinks, again, that aren't going to make you ill, some fun surprise elements that keep the whole thing entertaining. Like, are we going to have a video that makes you cry? Yes, of course, but we are not going to drag the program on for an hour and a half where you are now bored out of your mind and wondering how you are going to get out of this thing in a graceful way. It is tight. It is highly coordinated. It is planned very thoughtfully. And it also is planned with a thought towards ensuring that we're getting, sort of like your board, people in the room that the other people in the room want to be there with. And so when it comes to activating board members and recruiting corporate sponsors in particular, we are able to say that their target demographic from a business development standpoint is who is in the room. And we know that we can say that because, again, we're not just filling tables for the sake of filling tables. So we have fewer spots available, but we're asking more of you to sit in those spots. We're going to take great care of you while you're there. And you also know coming in that we are expecting this to be a successful evening. And if we're only going to have 200 people in the room, which is what we have, you're probably going to be expected to participate. And it's not going to be a big enough room that you can get lost, right? So the people that you're sitting with are going to know if you're not participating at some level.
Absolutely. And I love that, you're really making seating a strategy. And that's something that, that's something that's very personal to me. And I actually work with and help people do that, with their events. But when you have 200 people, and you've got the right 200 people in the room,
Yeah.
it's so much less overwhelming for you overall. But I also want to talk about, you were talking about having briefer programs, because I think one of the benefits of that, it allows you to better connect with more potential donors and supporters, especially first-time attendees or people you're wanting to get involved more deeply. So talk about how you, as the leader of the organization, use Dinner with Friends to connect with prospective donors at the gala.
So my thinking around that has been, again, we want to be concise, right? Brevity is important. You want to only ask for people's attention span for a reasonable amount of time, and you want to guarantee them that you're going to use their time well. And so we use our I would say, and again, this, this would be different with a different person leading or a different personality leading. This is just how I felt about my role. And that was that we were going to have a video that really showcases the mission and gives a firsthand, in depth ish glance into what this work looks like on a daily basis. And we want this video to be something that we can feel good about putting on our website, about showing to the kids who are featured in it, about the families of the kids who are in it seeing, right? So there's a significant amount of asset framing that goes into this. I therefore always considered it to be my role to get into a room with 200 people, right? This is not being recorded or put on the internet, and maybe translate in a less asset framed way what it is that we're trying to solve for here and why they are so important. I think something that is becoming increasingly more challenging, and I think this is probably a challenge that's born out of something really good, right? Like not exploiting people is a very important value. And I have been to fundraisers where they talk about their mission in such a positive asset framed way that no one understands why they need our money because it actually seems like everyone's doing pretty well. And so I've sort of thought of my role as one of translator between, the work that is being done by the team every day, a group of people who are in the room with a ton of capacity and a lot of good intentions, but frankly have, for the most part, very little exposure to this population or to the environments that we're operating in. And I kind of want to be a compelling bridge between the two.
That very, very well said. And it really is cool how strategically you think about all that and just getting the right people in the room and also just making sure things don't go on too long. But I'm really mostly glad about you can't be all high and you can't be all low. You can't have
Yeah,
people, and it's actually going to go kind of to our conduit as to why we're here today. When you're going into the auction, the appeal cannot be, or the testimonial video cannot be all bubblegum and lollipops because
right.
people are just going to get up and leave. And it can't be all dark because people are going to be depressed and no one's going to want to raise their paddle.
True.
And,
Yes.
we met through Lydia Finette, who's one of the very best auctioneers in the country at a recent event we were at for Waterloo Greenway. And talk a little bit about how you all highlight the organization's, mission throughout dinner, and especially, that video appeal, like right before Lydia walks on stage, so that it feels authentic, it feels inspiring, people understand the problem, and it encourages them to give during the live auction and the
Mhm.
funding, especially in a room with 200 people, because
Right.
doing a live auction and a funding, that's a really tight rope to follow with that, with that small of an audience.
It is. Yeah. And I think it hopefully is a reflection on our approach working that we have every year consistently in doing this event, raised 2 to 3 times in the paddle raise fund and need portion, what we raise in the auction, even though the auction has, thanks to Lydia, been enormously successful. I think the key, as you sort of hit on, is to strike the right balance between making people really care about the problem and want to help solve it, but then also say to them, we're not asking you to solve all the world's problems, right? This does not need to be a burden that you need to go out and live. We have experts in the room that know how to do this. All we're asking you to do is help us employ them, right? And like, friends, we recognize you. You're standing here. You have been talking with people throughout the evening. They are getting a glimpse into how impressive the professional mentors are, and just really how extraordinary that job is. And then I think it's such a great opportunity to say to people, the world is a broken, messed up place. We're trying to solve it in one specific way. We're asking you to do that with your money. And we know that because you're here, you have some to give, right? So like, I just think it's a nice, I feel like sometimes you go to things and you come away so burdened by the sadness of the mission and how overwhelming it feels. And we want people to feel like we are crystal clear on what we are asking of you. We know how to do the work day to day. We just need you to fund it. And we need everybody who's in the room to do that at some level, because again, there are only 200 of you, and we were very thoughtful about who we included.
And I think it's good that you mentioned because that's not, I don't want to say that's guilt per se, but we've curated this group because we know you all will be touched by this and you all want to help. So you're framing it in a way that is, you know, thank you for thinking of me. This is an awesome night. And yes, I'm compelled and happy to give and, and happy to share. And, the one thing, and Lydia's told me, that there's kind of a core group that does go every year. So how do you get that core group coming back year after year while also being thoughtful that any successful event has to have different people weaving in and out of the room every year so it's somewhat different, each year.
I very much hope, and I feel like I've been told this, that this is an event people want to go to. It is a really fabulous party with a wonderful, important mission on top. And that's kind of how I like to think about this work. I think so often in the, nonprofit, not for profit, let's call it maybe social profit space, it's thought of as like the sad stepchild of the business world. And what I always said to our team at Friends Austin was, we are running a company. We have the wonderful life affirming fact that we have an important mission at the end of the day on top of that. But if we don't have a highly performing business, the mission is irrelevant. And I think similarly, if we are going to throw a fundraising event that is an event people don't want to be at, we've really missed the mark. And so, I do think there's, of course, always an element of like that. So many in that core group know each other, enjoy each other. Now, this is like a thing that we do every year now that it's become established. But that's something that we tried to create very intentionally. And again, by having it be, not black tie in an 8,000 square foot ballroom with rubber chicken, right? By having it be something that like you might choose to do this on your Saturday night. And the fact that it's also making the world a better place is just like such a happy bonus.
I love that you talk about that, and I'm glad you've mentioned more than once about the guest experience is so important. And when it's a smaller group, it is easier to make sure that all 200 plates are absolutely delectable. It gets much harder
Of
the more
course.
and more people that are there. And I'm really glad that you brought that piece up. And also the fact that you think of it from a business mindset. And nonprofits, yes, they're not for profit, but at the same time, you just like you can tell a well-run gala versus a not well-run gala, you can walk into a nonprofit's office and tell which one's well-run and which one's not well-run. And if you especially if you're trying to get major donors to fund initiatives, maybe through major gifts, maybe not even through a gala, that all matters and it's important. And a gala is a really good way to kind of have the whole organization or a majority of the organization there. They get to see everybody. They get to see everybody working together, and that shows, in large part, how you are well run.
Mhm. Thank you. I agree with
Absolutely.
that.
Absolutely. And I know we're coming up on time today, so I always like to end with this one question. I think you're gonna have a really interesting take just because, of your background and you being able to scale this event so quickly. But that is, what is one thing all great nonprofit fundraising events have in common?
Uh, I don't know if this is a very sexy answer, but it is my answer. I think they have very clear values in common. And by that, I mean the value is not let's just go scrape together as much money as best we can and then just be glad it's over, which I think is fairly common in this space, right? I think if you have values of high expectations, curated details, an attitude of, and I'm sorry, this rhymes, a real attitude, approach of gratitude and relationship with the people that you have there. It informs the way the entire evening operates. And I think that the people who are part of it feel that. And so I think just having clarity on what it is you're doing and why, and being able to define how you're going to do it, and then everyone on the team understands those are the rules by which we're engaging is really valuable.
The values, and I love that hashtag attitude is gratitude. That's the hashtagable moment today, from that. But that, that was really well said. And I want to go back to something you were kind of inferring to this, but people can sense when people don't want to be there. And,
Yes.
that's the whole, if an organization is going and saying, they're just like, I just want to get through it. The guests pick up on that. And those are the ones that are trying to make the French exits 15 minutes into the program. And I see that, time and time again at events. So that was really good, important answer. So sexy aside, didn't need to be. It was a really good, valuable answer. So this was really an absolute pleasure, Nancy. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing the incredible work that Friends of the Children does through Dinner with Friends and its gala.
Thank you so much, Rob. I appreciate you.
Absolutely. And Dinner with Friends, benefiting Friends of the Children, will be held on May 1st, 2026 in Austin, Texas. For more information, please visit friendsaustin.org. And that will do it for this episode of Fun and Fundraising. I'm your host, Rob Giardinelli, reminding you to keep it fun, keep it interesting, and your guests will have a great time. Have a great day, everyone, and take care.